For most of my life, I've heard people both within and outside of the church argue the concepts of predestination versus foreordination, and I understand why people can be confused. On the one hand, the scriptures say that God knows everything from the beginning to the end, but if God knows everything, then He knows how I'm going to turn out. And if He knows every decision and mistake I'm going to make, that sounds a lot like predestination. My path is set, God knows it, and I just don't know it yet. But then we are also taught about agency and how we can choose and how these choices change our future. We are taught that we are foreordained to everything from callings in the church to our very exaltation. But these things are predicated upon our righteousness, i.e., our proper use of agency to receive these outcomes. But if we have choice and our future is unclear, then that doesn't jive with predestination and a view that God knows everything. Some have gone so far as to say that God doesn't really know the future. He just knows you so well, He knows what you will do. It is kind of like being omniscient, but is more like foreknowledge. Others have said that being omniscient doesn't really mean knowing everything, like everything. And they want to place limits and bounds on God's omniscience. So which is it, predestination or foreordination? In reality, both are true. You are foreordained and have agency, and yes, your eternal destination is up to you and your decisions. But at the same time, God does know everything, past, present, and future. He knows the decisions you're going to make and how you're going to turn out. But how can both of these make sense simultaneously? Now, many of you have probably worked through this bit of paradox before, but for those of you who haven't, or would perhaps like another way of explaining it to others, here is the way I have come to look at this and explain it. If I were to ask you if the moon spins on an axis, what would you say? Now, most people have to pause and think about it for a moment. How would you answer that? If you said no, it is probably because you know that you always see the same side of the moon. Throughout your entire life, you have never seen it spin or rotate. And that is true. You have never seen the back side of the moon because the same side always faces us. And if it is always the same, it isn't on an axis, right? Well, actually, you would be right and wrong. What if you were out in space, away from Earth looking at the moon? What would you see then? You would see the moon indeed spinning around the Earth. In fact, the Earth is the moon's axis because the moon is spinning around the Earth. So when you are standing on the axis, i.e. the Earth, which is a geocentric view, it doesn't look like it has an axis. But when you stand away from the Earth and Moon and take a heliocentric view, you can see that it is indeed on an axis. Now, how does this relate to our discussion about predestination and foreordination? Well, we from our earthly view see and live one perspective, and God from His perspective sees and has a different perspective altogether. Our reality is that we are in the middle of a mortal experience where our choices are very real and up to us to determine our own outcome. God, from His divine perspective, sees things differently and can see what choices we will make and does know the beginning from the end without that impacting our agency at all. The same thought process works for why we as mortals are bound by time, but God is not. See, we are on the timeline much like we are on the axis, while God is not on the timeline and can view all of time in its entirety. So what is foreordination for us looks like predestination to God, and both can exist simultaneously. Perhaps this is one way that we can think celestial, literally and figuratively, by viewing things from a more eternal perspective. Thanks for watching.